When you're exploring dominance and submission, is there one who has more control over the other? Like, is the dominant in charge? How's that relationship like?
Dom is only like proxy for the sub's authority. If someone feels like they need to establish their ego or their like status for their own, identity's sake, then doming isn't the way to do that. I don't know. Learn a new skill or gain confidence some other way. It's dangerous to render the sub powerless because then it's something else.
Today on Beyond Dating, Doyen shared the little known truth about being a dom and a sub. And our sponsor for today's episodes is Beyond, the newest dating app in town. Check it out at datebeyond.co.
Just doesn't want to go the same direction.
I had a curl that was sticking out.
That one is me. Right? It's like doesn't want to go the same direction as everything.
Oh yeah, you gotta have a little bit of difference going on.
Transgression.
Add a little spice.
Transgression makes things work. Yeah.
So what's something spicy you want to talk about today?
I don't know, like ghost pepper spice. What kind of like?
I mean, I want it to feel like there's pepper spray in the room. Let's get hot.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, so like take a knee. You gotta take a knee afterwards. Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we could do that. You want to lead us? Like, I'm happy.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite spicy activity?
Spicy activity. We're gonna go right there. My favorite spicy activity, like no filter.
No filter.
Honestly, throat fucking.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's like my secret sauce.
Okay.
So like all other sort of activities that like allow for my partner's arousal to reach that level where we can like go into that sort of really deep space together. It's kind of magical.
I've heard of, being able to have a throatgasm, like orgasming, from throat fucking. So how does that come about?
With, I don't know, like patience and like grit, so to speak. You got to stick with it. It's like not for the faint of heart, so to speak. So I think for the person who's receiving, they need to really be comfortable, right? Where their bodies and the space and the dynamic is safe enough for, the exploration to go forward, like, where that progresses beyond like the shallow rhetoric of it, like the surface level of just like oral, because it's not that. It's like, that's part of it, but it's deeper than that. No pun intended, or pun intended. And there's a connection between what's happening like in the throat. Some people say it's the vagus nerve, which is kind of around here. So I don't really think that's the thing that's triggering it, but people have different opinions about it. So through my research, the extensive market research, whenever you sort of bypass the gag and like get deep into the throat, there's also like a correlated contraction in the like sphincter and pussy. So that happens like enough and like good rhythm, it will like, come out the other end.
Wow, I didn't know that. So how do you create that, safe space for your partner when you're trying to experience this?
Well, personally, I mean, it starts with agreements, ultimately, right? It starts with agreements between, like, with the individual, establishing a desire for, such an exchange. I don't know. It always seems really clear when someone desires that. It's it's a very clear filter for, participation. Like, are you into this? Absolutely. Or like, right. Or they need to build to it. Like sometimes, someone who's open to it doesn't have the experience to allow themselves to go there. And there's like a progression to get to that point. So it's different, right? Like, and there are some folks who are like, at least encounter me like very like experienced, right? Like they've been at least part of the way down the road that I would go, maybe fully or beyond where I would go. But most haven't, right? Like there's a level of desire, but it needs like scaffolding to get to the throatgasm, or, yeah, whatever you called it. I've never heard that term, but I get it.
The throatgasm, scaffolding to get to the throatgasm.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Just climbing up the ladder.
Exactly.
So if I'm new to this and I want to explore,
Well, are you? Okay.
I mean, me personally, no. But for those who aren't, you're curious, you want to explore, what are some steps that you and your partner could take to, try to do something a little more rough
Around like specifically with like the throat?
It doesn't have to be specifically around the throat, but just like playing when you're playing with pleasure, and
sensation, things like that. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Negotiation, it sounds like a term that's like, say, for business school or something, like lawyers, but it's essential to get into that place, right? Getting a feel for your person, what they're really into, and being able to lean into someone's desires and sensibilities, their limitations, their boundaries, and then figuring out, I guess, like a pathway based on that whole recipe, on how to move past certain limitations safely. Right? So that's abstract. If we're going to give an example, so there's a sub that I had an experience with. She might be able to hear this conversation right now. Who, when we were first exploring our dynamic with top being embodying, sub dynamic, they hadn't experienced that before explicitly, right? I think, it kind of just occurs, right? It happens. It's, like, oh, someone's just aggressive and you like that, right? But then when it's explicit, where there's like boundary pushing as part of the agreement, then we have to figure out what the beginning of the boundaries are, and just giving and surrendering to being a bottom was like the first one. It's like, open to this, but I might like overreact if, I'm triggered. So how do we begin to address that? So for instance, something as subtle as, playing dress up with someone, right? Where they take orders or postures or assumed, and things that don't require a whole lot of sensation or, sensory boundaries, which can be more challenging than, sort of roles, right? Position. So things like that are really good to get started, establishing those things, making agreements, a contract, even, right? Like, this is what this is, and this is how far we'll go. And when we get to that point, let's reevaluate. I think, and then adding layers in over time and establishing, how successful, we're going to kind of stick with the business terms, how successful, this was, right? First time being spanked or flogged or whipped or whatever extreme. Did you like that? Are there parts about it that you wish never happened, or, right? And from there, what the next iteration may look like.
So when you're pushing boundaries like this and communicating with your partner, what's the process after you've hit like the limit? What's that process like? How do you pull them back in and show them that they're still in this place of like love and care and support.
How I do it, or in general?
In general,
Wait.
like a tip
Yeah.
for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sort of eye contact is crucial, especially after, like you get to a critical point, like eye contact, like humanizing. There's an aspect of that experience where the bottom has assigned, their authority for me to, or a top, a dom in this scenario, to make a good decision or a series of good choices. And if one of those choices, leads to problem, trouble, pain, hurt in any way, then it's critical that whoever's doming is like also taking the accountability to like, begin with humanizing themselves and being humble enough to accept that there's like more, to uncover. So how that person's feeling, apologizing if it's authentic, maybe. But like apologies can be problematic.
Yeah.
When, they're shallow and don't have action behind them. Being available to take correction and implement the correction as soon as they're able, right? Because it can be emotional both ways. Like if there's a problem in a scene, whoever made the mistake is also not feeling good. Mm-hmm. Hopefully. Yeah. It's not always that way, but you shouldn't be doming anyone if you make a mistake and you don't have any feelings about it. You can just put that on the cover, right? Like if you're doming someone and you make a mistake or told that you've like created some hurt or some pain and you don't feel anything in regards to that, then you should stop. Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, I think, emotionally, physically, there's a tremendous amount of accountability. That's part of that role, which is probably why most people don't want to be in that position.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get into this?
That's a long story. Informally, I guess, would like cover it blanket statement. Informally, for sure. I'm trying to remember the first instance where I was aware that I was doming someone. It was, I don't know, I was young, like, I don't know, like 19, 20 years old. And I had partners that I would see, regularly and experiment with things because I just felt like very experimental with my sexuality at that age. And we tried things that were clearly not part of like the sort of sex position, pleasure exchange, standards, right? Choking, restriction, dangerous objects. I won't list them because I don't want you to create any perceptions of me. I admittedly did not know what I was doing, but I was very interested and it felt natural for me. I watched a film. I don't know, in a music studio with a bunch of people, and then someone had a great idea to put this porno on the TV of this like really hardcore scene, this person who did like really hardcore films. And I had a moment where after like, I don't know, like I said, sharing these things informally, seeing someone make agreements on camera, fulfill those agreements, and then like check in with the person at the end and establish whether or not they were having a great time, like really blew my mind. I was pretty young still, like maybe 23. It was like intense stuff. And there was no internet that had like access to content like this at that time, right? You can find these things now. But yeah, and that really got me thinking. I was like, wait a second, this kind of challenges my beliefs about what women at that, because that's who my partners were, what women would tolerate and what could be pleasurable in that. So I just sort of like threw it away and decided to, be a little more, I don't know, brazen about that and like more communicative about it.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, so then what really is sense play for people who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, it's in the words like sensorial, anything that is going to challenge the nerves that are not necessarily on the sex centers of the body. Temperature, various objects, pressure, pain, soft objects, right? Extremes and experiences. So, there's a category called sharps. There's rope, there's leather, there's metal. There's, flogging, spanking, caning, impact, right? Kind of goes around all of those. Asphyxiation in various ways, right? I like to say there's a choke, there's a crank, and there's a strangle, right? So like just for restricting breathing, they're not everything that restricts breathing is a choke. Like there's a strangle, there's a choke, and there's a crank.
Can you share what the differences are between those?
Yeah. So I'd say like a choke is in general going to, limit the blood flow to the carotid arteries. Right? So like there's this thick artery right here and if you press on it, it's going to like stop blood flow to the brain and you will go unconscious. And typically when people are choked, right, that is what they're desiring while a strangle is really about like the wind, like the trachea, I think is what we're talking about, right? Like compression here, like, if I were to, I don't know, these may be loose definitions, but this is how I categorize it. A strangle is like where I'm looking to like cut off like the windpipe, but not, put pressure on like the blood between the body and the brain. And the crank is like pressure that doesn't necessarily stop either, but it's pressure on the area to the point that it can be overwhelming or stimulating, depending on how much sensitivity there is.
Oh wow, that's so interesting. I'm kind of exploring in this space, but like I don't know very deep, so that's like really helpful actually.
It's kind of technical. Like I think it's a technical exchange, right? I think the choices that are the authority that's being assigned, the authority that's being assigned warrants a level of technical awareness in order to maintain the safety of a scene.
So what are some other ways that you can maintain safety when you're exploring in these scenes?
Some other ways I think would have to do with safe words, check-ins before and after, which, have levels of complexity. You're not even someone who's the most experienced, you're going to make assumptions and mistakes potentially with people that you're familiar with. I mean, that's something that occurs, in the closest relationships. There's, also a need to stay familiar and refamiliarize with what a partner desires and needs. And, being available to like receive correction is probably the most important thing. But having like safety words, signs, symbols, things, like in jiu-jitsu, we do that.
Yeah.
So I think
tap out.
tap out. I think that one's pretty clear. So you don't need to be able to speak to do it, but you do need your hands. So that's a thing. So if someone's tied or like strapped down some way, then you need another way.
So if somebody's like tied, what is your other way? Say I'm tied.
I would never take away every way that someone could communicate, right? So like you're going to need your mouth or your hands to be able to give a signal. But so I wouldn't dare take away both.
Good tip.
Right. Yeah, in general, I'd say like it's just safe to like make sure that someone's no has space in a scene.
So when you're exploring dominance and submission, is there one who has more power than the other? Like, is the dominant really the one in charge, or like
That's a good
how's that
question.
relationship like?
No, the dom's not in charge. Yeah, the dom's not in charge. The dom is only like a proxy for the sub's authority, the sub's power. You know, it's like the sub says, you know, for the sake of this scene, for the sake of the pleasure that we're going to exchange, here is like the authority to enact these things. But that agreement and the scope of that agreement is completely the subs to establish, you know.
This is very eye opening for.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's not, if someone feels like they need to establish their ego or their like status in for their own, you know, identity's sake, then doming isn't the way to do that. I don't know, like learn a new skill or gain confidence some other way. You know, it's dangerous to render the sub powerless because then it's something else.
So, do you have any, tips for people who are curious about exploring in dominance and submission, or sense play in other ways?
Yeah, absolutely. Just, you know, I think one of the best ways to get familiar with things is like try things on yourself, and you'll understand, you know, there'll be an instant where you're clearly drawn to applying it to yourself, which might mean that you're also more willing to apply it to someone else. You may really appreciate a sensation, but don't really have the grit to apply it to yourself, and which might really suggest that you're more submissive than a top, more of a bottom than a top, right? Because there's a difference between bottom and topping and like dominating. And
Can you explain the difference?
yeah, you know, I would say there doesn't need to be kink involved to have a top and bottom in a scene.
Okay, so what does that mean?
All right, yeah, so unpack it a little bit. So, you know, penetration or oral or massage and caressing and tantra and these things don't necessarily require any kink, right? And you can have a top in that scene and a bottom, like someone who is creating the sensations while the other is receiving the sensation, or someone who's sort of leading the scenario because, you know, the top could be telling the bottom what to do to create the sensation, right? From the bottom, a bottom can top, right? So, right, from the person on the bottom can top with their voice, with their confidence in the scene, right? Their experience. While, you know, a dom is by definition topping, while also adding in complexity with like, you know, things that are not necessarily involving like pleasuring erogenous zones. The entire scene becomes the erogenous zone, like the agreement that you will sit on your knees facing this direction until I release you, right? That's topping, but it's dominance where, you know, there's something other than the sex that's being, you know, exchanged or developed in that scene.
So, is there anything else that, from your personal experience, that has, that like led you to exploring the dom sub lifestyle?
I mean, so many things. I feel like for me, it just happens that way very naturally. I think, of course, we're unpacking all the complexity of being human and everything that comes before this moment, right? Like it's part of the decision. But for sure, the feedback that I receive is a necessary part of that. If the feedback that I was receiving was like, maybe not so much, then I probably wouldn't be as enthusiastic about it. But I'd say, one of the things, it's like a feedback loop, really, where the more energy I can support and create as a dom or top, the more I'm asked to do it.
Interesting. So it just like continues on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, do you have anything else to share? Like,
I mean, yeah, we just what do you want to, what do you want to know? There's so many things.
Fun, juicy tip. If I'm wanting to embrace being a sub and build my confidence doing that. And the same for if I want to embrace being a dom and build my confidence doing that.
Yeah, like focus on one area at a time. Right? There's so many things you can explore. There's, a depth of knowledge and experience and like nuance in choking and sharps or rope, shibari in particular, right? Like I'm a dom, but I am not the most, experienced in shibari. I think there are people who are like spectacular at that, like artists really. It's like a lifetime's worth of work. So choose a thing, explore it, see how you feel with that. Find the limits, find the boundaries in that thing, and then explore another thing. Explore that thing with multiple partners, if possible, if that's part of your lifestyle. And the great thing about kink exploration, it doesn't require the person that you're exploring it with to be your lover, right? You can be tied by someone who is technically skilled and who can dom, but doesn't have to have any, explicit sexual exchange involved other than, shibari or knife play or choking. It might be, depending on the energy and the chemistry, like it can develop. It's like it's adjacent, you know what I mean? So I'd say for sure, choose an area and explore, find the range, and then one thing will lead to another. I know it sounds pretty cliche, but quite literally, if you're into flogging and spanking, I think that's probably the most accessible entry point. People really like to be spanked. It's like easy, doesn't require much, and like it's quite simple to understand how to build up pressure and like get someone to like express their limits vocally, right? Because it doesn't require that they're restricted, doesn't take too much technical skill. For topping, I would say, or doming, like, if you're using, you're doing the thing, I'm the one like using the tools or whatever. Again, like find an area that you want to explore and practice it on yourself first to know like how much anyone or how much you can take of this thing before you give it to someone else.
That's
like,
a good tip.
Do not start experimenting on other people's bodies. Yeah, it just makes all the sense, right?
Yeah.
And, start slow before you just like go for it. Like it's great to sort of try to be the scene that you saw that made you want to do it, right? It's like, yeah, you want to be this porn scene, right? It's like, It's fantastic. But, those are experienced people. So, just like respect, like what's at stake. There's like physical, emotional harm and, the relationship itself is at stake. So, like honor those things.
Nice. So, do you currently have a sub? And if so, what is that relationship like?
I have subs. Yeah. Those relationships are fantastic. I'm really, I don't know, I'm in a place in my life now where maybe for the first time ever, I feel like there's like harmony across all of that, and it's been sustaining that way. It's amazing. So I think it's a testament of how the work is going. It's not always perfect. Still receive corrections or like a tap, a nudge for, to be aware of things that are happening with them, between us, between them, right? Between my partners even. So yeah, it requires like leaning in all the time, being available to say, okay, so tell me more about that. What can I do about that? Right. So I think that's the nature of what allows it to go well. But yeah, so I want to give a shout out to a sub out there. So when we started this, we had a conversation about how we were going to refer to me, and the name that we're using for this conversation is Doyen, which was selected by one of my subs. That was specifically a non sort of hierarchical title, like sir or master or right. I don't know. Some people, I don't think daddy is necessarily hierarchical. It's a role. But is a daddy is superior to a child? I don't think so. Not if you ask the dad. So anyway, just kind of getting back to off the metaphor, but into this subject. So that name was given to me by one of the subs. So I just want to say hi. And yeah, it's going well. I think it's going well. I'm not getting any cue that I'm in a problematic area right now so I think it's all good.
That's good. I'm so happy that that's going well. And this has been very insightful. Yeah. So thank you very much for sharing all this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah. Oh, can I share one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
So one of my partners and I, and then a community that has been developing around this work that we do, offer something that allows people to sort of touch the space in a way that is meaningful, right? Because there's a level of sort of existential reality that comes to question when you really give into who you are sexually, what that means to you as an entire being, to allow that to be, I don't know, sovereign and have agency around that. So we do work that's like a meditation around this that sort of activates people's sense of community, so they're not going through it alone. Their senses, so that sensory experience becomes part of their existential experience. You know what I mean? Like who am I? That part. And their senses go together, right? We're all a combination of those things. So we offer a meditation that's part of that. It's called ecstatic frequencies. It's not easy to come by, but if you do, someone tells you about it, then maybe just lean into it a little bit. It might be something helpful for you too.
I'll definitely check it out. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Hey. Well, hopefully we'll talk again soon and I'll be able to experience that meditation with you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for hosting me.
Of course.